the correct amount of migration into Britain is, aside of actual needs in our economy from the most righteous perspective, zero. So if we start from God, if we start from truth, if we start from the light within us, blessed by God, and say, what would an honest economy look like? It wouldn't invent money out of nowhere, because that's a selection pressure for venality, and that weakens democracy, and therefore weakens arguments for democracy, which takes away the whole position of apparent levity that we claim to example and think that we demonstrate by taking in migrants. It would be a position without usury, because it would stabilise people's moods as well as people's savings, currency, habits, virtues. So you're talking about stabilising society in virtue. Otherwise it would just be the third world going to the third world, or creating the third world, or adding to the third world. Now, if we take the position, therefore, that we only take what we need from the position of the most stable things, we've also got to incorporate a kind of forecast. It's like, well, what will happen from the position of stopping usury? Do we need a certain amount of time to stagger that, to phase that out? And if we do, what can we do in relation to training our own people and incentives and economics in order to follow that line that would be counter to accepting large amounts of immigration? So we don't have to accept, on principle, anybody into our country, because we have the right to decide who comes and who doesn't. So we don't have to do anything. Now you can take the moral argument, and of course it gets convoluted, where you consider that the country has been funding wars with its fake money system, Judaic currency, for decades that have destabilised regions. So you can keep having an almost infinite well of compassion. If you take the view that people that are still swelling in chaos tens of years later are not doing so because of their own incompetence or outside interference. If there is outside interference, then render the line of account accordingly. But if it's not us interfering, then don't render it to us. If it is us interfering, then render that to your own government. Render that to a judgment upon your own government. But of course that's meaningless without abandoning usury, because you can't access the government if you don't have access to sanity on a wide enough scale, which is what the selection pressure of righteousness, against which usury, is all about. So what is the opposite of righteousness? Usury. It's just that people that are telling us that we ought to do usury reckon that they're righteous. It's Judaism. It's Judaic religious terrorism. It was given unto the Jews to do that for a specific purpose. Maybe it was Lucifer, maybe it was God. But there's a time to stop living from the magic money tree. You know, you lend to people because they want it, and you lend it interest because they're venal. They want things faster, and they think if they go faster, that will be good for them. But of course, if they go faster, other people can go faster because they can lend it interest also. So it's really a battle of who gets there first with infinite money. Who gets there first with their pragmatic in a system of infinite money. And of course, when that habit is a selection pressure for venality, which it is, greed, venality, being for sale, being a prostitute, then actually you're debasing the country for your own gain. So it's really a king's habit. Usually it's the habit of leaders who do not feel that they will have an effect on those around them, or indeed all the physic of that which they interact with, by their own habits. It's a satanic habit. Of course, if you were funding some kind of infrastructure, if you were stabilising people's currencies by having banks and therefore saying you can come and go and it's a stable storage place and we'll charge you interest, if you could draw up a grid that would make the currency stable according to that, then it would be a good idea, but you can't do it because the money will always differ. If I've got a more stable vault, then that means I can charge you higher currency potentially, higher interest I should say. If I charge you higher interest, maybe I make more money, I can make more stronger things. So what it does is selects for power in finance rather than power in war, which is a good thing for a Piscean age if you want to wean people off swords. But it's not a good thing for the Aquarian age, because the Aquarian age is saying, look, if I lend you X amount of money and you have access to better means of building more secure vaults, that I'll be able then to charge a potentially higher interest, and I will destabilise the currency across the difference of storage qualities. or plans or amount of money available. And so those who manipulate the greatest amount of complexity in the system will be favoured for. In other words, it is a selection pressure not only for venality but for needless complexity. And those two work together to expand information cancerously, rather than the counterposition, which is to expand information righteously and holistically, which is with righteousness. You know, a Jew went to heaven and he said that what was on the gates was truth and righteousness. You notice they're put together. If you just say truth, well then what about righteousness? If you just say righteousness, then what about the personal aspect? So let Judaism evolve. We've got to take the position that we do not owe the world anything more than what we owe it. So if we have created a lot of refugees, what are we doing to stabilise the position? Are we actually able to teach anybody anything? Do we know anything that's worth knowing, or are we just people who are better able to lend money in financial fiction and think that we stimulate economies by getting into massive debts? You don't stimulate economy by getting into massive debts, because you damage everything else about an economy. You damage the morale, which is the fount of all economy, because you damage the social structure. You make it able to be preyed upon by leaders who damage the morale because of what they take from the country, or what they add to the country, or what they do internationally in foreign policy, or anything like that, or what they do in social policy. You know, nobody can see the root from whence their integrity springs, and they don't see a rondurity, they don't see a roundness to it, to anything. So everything becomes dog eat dog. It becomes an upgrade from survival of the nastiest. It just becomes the kind of a technologicalization of the animal kingdom. And with that comes all sorts of medicinal views that are along that line. It's a Descartes split view. Mind and body are separate. If you want to see somebody, you go to a specialist about each isolated thing, but you never see anybody holistically, so nobody ever looks at you holistically. So you go through a production line of death and call it medicine. And when you're at the end of that, maybe you get something called palliative care, which really means that they murder you by morphine, because they say you're going anyway. They just want to free up the beds, but they say you're going anyway. They know nothing about medicine. The whole system is a joke. And what I'm telling you is it has to evolve. It has to evolve immediately. And the way you do that is by stopping making all measures venal, by stopping the cancer of finance. Now you can say, okay, well, what if we draw it away to a conglomeration? And the conglomeration, well, is the conglomeration righteous? Because it looks to me like the conglomeration is in bed with Freemasons who are Luciferists. Looks like they're in bed with the Judaists who are Luciferists, because it's all past tense stuff. All the religion of the Piscean age is Luciferianly corrupted. You notice that they've all got their own flaws. You think, oh, maybe Islam would be the answer if it was not fanatic. Maybe Judaism would be the answer if it was not a Severus. Maybe Christianity would be the answer if it didn't mix up Jesus and God. Maybe Buddhism would be the answer if it wasn't nihilistic. Maybe Taoism would be the answer if it could get in touch with God. And you realise that it's all split up and it can flow into the truth, but it's not the truth. It's the way that groups assembled themselves in an attempt to reach for a higher consciousness while keeping their feet on the ground in an age where things were too much split apart. Do you see? And they had an integrity in the local in that sense, but they were always drawn away into bigger conflicts by people who didn't govern themselves well enough. It was the age of kings, and that age is finished, okay? We don't need kings. If we want kings, we need kings that are a bit like Jesus. We need kings that are righteous. We can't have any more the make-believe of finance and pretend that there's not an objective argument against it which is provable in every way, that righteousness and usury are opposed. That's been a way that Jews have made money after they were split up. They got dispersed by the Roman Empire. There were conflicts, okay, and they got dispersed, they travelled, and they've made a lot of money out of nowhere. They've supplied to people. There's been structures in the background, some of it Freemasonry, some of it Judaism. There's crossover. There's so much Judaism in Freemasonry. But Freemasonry is accidentally or on purpose Luciferian. Probably at the highest level it is Luciferian. It does literally heed Lucifer, the fallen angel. And it thinks that it's above Satanism, isn't that? No, it isn't. Luciferism is just a subtle version of Satanism. They've all been deceived by the Piscean thinking with the Aquarian imperative, which is the overlordship. It's not that Aquarius wants overlordship, it's that he sees the whole picture. And of course, the whole picture to each thing. Because it's not that Aquarius is not going to get rid of nations. Aquarius is going to reveal nations. And this is the opposite of immigration, do you see? This is the opposite of uncontrolled immigration, an immigration of people that are not affined to the country and won't orient to the country. So if you orient yourself to what's real, then your immigration argument grows from that soil. Otherwise, it's an aberrant form of an argument, which is using what I would call Piscean logic, which ultimately is not looking at the bigger picture, can't see the bigger picture, cannot conceive of things deeply enough to see the answer to its own argument.